If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network. U.S. authorities had been investigating the Philadelphia crime family since the late 1970s, and many members of the family, including Nicky Scarfo, were charged with racketeering, illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, drug trafficking, and murder. At the end of 1989, 20 members of Scarfo's organization were serving lengthy prison sentences, and another 10 were on trial. 5 members of the family had turned state's evidence against Scarfo. Soldiers Nicholas Caramandi and Eugene Milano, reputed captains Andrew Del Giorno and Lawrence Merlino, and worst of all, underboss and nephew of the Philadelphia crime family, Phil Leonetti. On April 5, 1989, Scarfo was convicted of first-degree murder for the 1985 death of rival mobster, Frank D'Alfonso, along with 6 of his lieutenants. Scarfo, who had already been sentenced to 15 years in prison, was sentenced to life imprisonment the following day. On October 31, 1989, it is alleged that Joey Merlino attempted to murder the son of Nicky Scarfo Jr. This took place at a Philadelphia Italian restaurant called Dante and Luigi's, located at 762 South 10th Street. Jr. was hit several times in the chest, neck, and arm. Although police never charged anyone with the attempted murder, police and the FBI believed Joey Merlino was behind the shooting to avenge an earlier plot by Scarfo Sr. on Merlino's father. Another motive for the attempted hit was to send a clear message that the Scarfos were no longer in charge of the South Philadelphia rackets. Fearing another mafia war, Scarfo Sr. had his son made into the Lucchese crime family in New York for his own safety. He would later become a captain within the New York family, with help from sometime cellmate and later boss of the Lucchese family, Victor Amuso. Scarfo's cousin, Anthony Piccolo, would become the acting boss of the family from the time Scarfo was arrested until the early 1990s. As gambling was legalized in Atlantic City in 1976, and Nicodemo Scarfo allegedly became deeply involved in organized crime's infiltration of the casino industry. Amongst Scarfo's closest associates was Salvador Merlino. Nicky's rule over organized crime in Atlantic City has been characterized as one of the most violent and murderous in American mafia history. While Nicky Jr. was in high school, his father was brought back to Philadelphia by the mob. In 1980, Scarfo Sr. was named the family's consigliere, and in 1981 he was named boss. Only then did the Scarfos begin to live a more lavish lifestyle. By one account, Nicky Scarfo Jr. was not involved in crime during his teens and did not intend to become involved in the syndicate. As one classmate noted, "When I knew him, he was a good guy. He was just a regular guy. Everyone knew who his father was, but we never talked about that." After graduation, Jr. allegedly became involved in organized crime. He became a close friend of Joseph Merlino, the son of Scarfo crime family underboss Salvador Merlino. However, the relationship with Joey Merlino was to prove inauspicious. Their friendship, which was very close, ruptured in 1988 when Chucky Merlino was convicted of racketeering and sentenced to 45 years in federal penitentiary. Joey Merlino was then demoted by boss Nicky Scarfo. This is when Scarfo Jr. allegedly ended his friendship with Joseph Merlino. Philadelphia crime family boss Ralph Natale later testified in court that Merlino hated Scarfo from then on. Nicky Scarfo's conviction undermined his son's position within the Philly mob. Many members were angry at his mismanagement of the family and for his arrogance as the boss. Nicky Scarfo Jr. became an unimportant player in the family after the attempted hit on his life. He adopted a very low profile. Police assumed he moved to New Jersey because he had few allies within the family. A guy named George Fresalone was appointed as his bodyguard. Fresalone would become an informant. He recorded over 75 hours of conversations with mobsters, including Scarfo. As a soldier within the Lucchese crime family, Jr. became involved in a number of criminal enterprises and was said to be a fair earner. In 1990, he and Gaetano Scafitti were allegedly ordered to beat mobster Martin Angelina because he refused to stop associating with the Merlinos. According to court testimony by Scafitti, who had turned state's evidence by this time, they beat Angelina with aluminum bats to make sure the bats wouldn't break. In August 1990, Scarfo Jr. was arrested on federal charges. He was charged with racketeering and conspiracy to manufacture and distribute illegal video poker machines. He pleaded guilty and received a 7-year prison sentence in November 1993. During his imprisonment, Jr. was placed in protective isolation by prison authorities. Government officials claimed to have received information indicating that his life was in danger in prison. Thus, they isolated him from the rest of the population, permitting him limited exercise and other time out of his cell. He and his attorneys claimed that no such information existed and that the involuntary isolation was punishment for his other alleged but unproven criminal activity to organize crime. Scarfo sued, and a court ordered him returned to the general population in June of 1994. Based on time already served, he was released by 1996. Shortly after his release, he was indicted on aggravated assault and illegal weapons charges in May of 1996 after a fight in an Atlantic City bar. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 18 months. While Nicky Scarfo Jr. was living in Jersey and serving time in prison, his father attempted to run the Philadelphia crime family from his own prison cell. But the elder Scarfo soon lost control of the Philly mob. In 1991, John Stanfa was named acting boss. Joseph Merlino challenged Stanfa for control of the family in 1993, and a major mob war broke out between Stanfa's old guard, backed by the Gambino crime family, and Merlino's Young Turks faction. Joseph Salvador Merlino, also known as the John Gotti of Passyunk Avenue, is the only son of Italian-Albanian parents Rita and Salvador Merlino, a former Philadelphia crime family underboss and soldier. Joey was raised in South Philadelphia and Ventnor City, New Jersey. He is also the nephew of deceased Scarfo crime family captain Lawrence Merlino. He had been friends with Mikey Chang, Ciancaglini, and his brother Joey since attending grade school. In the 1970s, his father owned and operated the 9M Bar, located at 9th Street and Moyamensing Avenue in South Philadelphia. Nicky Scarfo used this bar as his criminal headquarters during his attempt to become the new boss of the Philly mob. Merlino has been described as a younger version of the legendary boss John Gotti. An associate once said of Merlino that he liked to go out. He liked to party. He liked beautiful women on both of his arms. He loved the fame, publicity and limelight of the mob life. It was alleged Merlino was left $10 million by his father. Even though it was alleged he blew most of it, he got that feeling of being a millionaire and refused to lose it. He often wore expensive jewelry. He was seen as a savior to the poor. Merlino would hand out turkeys at Christmas on camera. He also hosted an annual Christmas dinner for the poor and gave back to the community. He was also said to regularly donate to the children's hospitals across the state. Merlino often invited TV crews to his annual Christmas party for the homeless. He was a fixture at the city's nightclubs, restaurants, and sporting events. With longtime buddies Salvador Scafitti, Sonny Valenti, Michael Ciancaglini, and George Borgesi, the crew was known for stick-ups and starting fights in clubs. In August of 1989, he was charged with robbing an armored car of $1.3 million. He was convicted a few months later. It was alleged he robbed those he committed the heist with. According to mobster Ralph Not Ale, he and Merlino began plotting to take over the Philadelphia Mafia while they were cellmates in 1990. Not Ale later named Steve Mazin, George Borgesi and Martin Angelina, an opponent of Nicky Scarfo Jr., all Merlino associates, as co-conspirators in the takeover plan. Around 1991, John Stanfa was elevated to boss of the Philadelphia crime family. He also had the backing of the Gambino crime family of New York. Stanfa named Anthony Piccolo as consigliere. Both Piccolo and Stanfa reportedly ran the family for the imprisoned Scarfo prior to Stanfa being made boss. As the boss, Stanfa always talked about the flaws of Scarfo, yet in a lot of ways he did the same thing. Stanfa put in place the street tax again. Every criminal had to pay a tax on his activities. This created tension and threats of violence on the streets of Philadelphia. Right away Stanfa put in place an atmosphere that wouldn't be good for business. He sent out Felix Pacino to collect the street tax. Felix was a soldier in the Philly mob. He was also a known operator in illegal gambling and drug dealing. On April 23, 1976, the FBI raided one of the largest crap games on the East Coast and identified Pacino as one of its controllers on behalf of the Bruno crime family. According to Philip Leonetti, Felix Pacino and Tony Ferrante reportedly supplied the shotgun used in the 1980 Angelo Bruno murder from Newark, New Jersey to Front Street, Philadelphia. In January 1981, he was subpoenaed before a grand jury in Philadelphia to give testimony about the murder. He was also questioned about the murders of his close associates Anthony Caponegro and Frank Sinden. Things were running okay for Stanfa. The street tax was easy money. Then on January 29, 1992, Felix was murdered and the media went crazy. They called it the first mob hit in 7 years. He was shot 3 times in the neck and head, behind the wheel of his 1977 Buick, on the 1200 block of Mifflin Street, less than a block from his home, on East Passyunk Avenue. At the time of the murder, he had allegedly been promoted to captain and was reportedly in line to serve as John Stanfa's underboss. Windows on the passenger and driver's side were shattered. His body was slumped toward the passenger seat. The Philadelphia Inquirer described him as the friendly old man. He could be seen each day walking his dog around his South Philadelphia neighborhood, leaving his apartment at precisely the same time, getting a newspaper, and then crossing East Passyunk Avenue for a cup of coffee. At first, both Stanfa and the FBI had no clue as to who was behind the murder, but pretty soon things became clear. Police stated at the time of the killing, Bacino was shot by a heavy-set man in a dark windbreaker, who fled on foot. He was allegedly murdered by Michael Ciancaglini and Stephen Mazin. Within months of being given his promotion to captain, Bacino's authority was being challenged by Joey Merlino and Mikey Chang's crew of wise guys, who began squeezing area bookmakers and loan sharks for extortion money. Merlino and his crew were already running things and were doing pretty good. They already had the street tax in place to oppose Stanfa's, so when Bacino came around collecting what they felt was their money, he had to go. The Bacino hit would be the first casualty in the war between Merlino and Stanfa. Pretty soon, the boss found out about the Young Turks, as they would later be called by the media, and took action against them. Stanfa operated by the saying, "Keep your friends close, but your enemies even closer." As a result, he and Joey Merlino would be seen together at social occasions and at mob meetings. In September, Stanfa held a secret ceremony in which Joey Merlino, Michael Ciancaglini and Biagio Adornetto were inducted into the Philadelphia family as made members. People around Stanfa warned him that these youngsters were no good and that they would bring the whole thing down, but Stanfa said he knew and would take care of it. Stanfa even made the 33-year-old Joseph Ciancaglini, brother of Merlino's second-in-command, Michael Ciancaglini, his underboss. This was all in the interest of promoting peace. In the meantime, Stanfa decided he could use some new blood and got himself some Sicilian soldiers by the name of Biagio Adornetto and Rosario Bellacci. Stanfa, in an unusual tactic, he also recruited heavily for the war, men who were not of Italian heritage, including the Vesey brothers and Frank Martins. According to the former executive director of the Pennsylvania Crime Commission, Frederick Martins, Stanfa brought in people, like the Vesey brothers, who had no background in the mob, but who were willing to break legs and pull a trigger. One of the Vesey brothers, John Vesey, was eventually made and became a hitman and captain within the Stanfa faction. On August 5, 1993, Merlino survived a drive-by shooting ordered by Stanfa, only taking a bullet to the backside. However, Michael Ciancaglini was killed in the shooting. In retaliation, Stanfa's son Joseph was shot in the face in a daring rush-hour drive-by shooting on the expressway, but he survived. The Philadelphia mob war lasted nearly 3 years. During the all-out 1993 mob war, Stanfa reportedly ordered Merlino's assassination at least 10 more times, but he survived every attempt. Merlino was sent to jail in 1994 for violating his parole. John Stanfa was indicted on RICO charges and conspiracy to commit murder on March 17, 1994. He was convicted of all charges in November of 1995 and sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences. When it became clear that he would not continue to run the Philadelphia crime family from prison, Stanfa's power declined and the Gambino crime family allegedly cut off connections with Philadelphia. However, Merlino allegedly took over upon getting out of jail in November 1994. It became apparent later that he was really the power, merely using Not Ali as a figurehead. The New York families offered the position to Merlino, but he turned it down. He believed that the FBI would target him as boss of the crime family more than any other member. Ralph Not Ali, a former Bruno associate and ally of Merlino, then took over as boss upon Stanfa's conviction. In a move that remains controversial today, he was inducted into the mob by Joey Merlino, who was at the time just a soldier in the Philadelphia crime family. Ralph immediately took over the title of boss on the same day as his induction. He eventually became a government witness after he was arrested for running the Philadelphia and South Jersey rackets. After years of being plagued with internal power struggles, informants and federal indictments, Joey Merlino finally took over as boss of the Philadelphia crime family in the late 1990s, with Steve Mazin holding the title of underboss and George Borgesi as consigliere. In the late 90s, Merlino allied himself with the Pagans motorcycle gang. Authorities believed he would use the Pagans to help settle underworld disputes. In 1995, Merlino survived additional assassination attempts. That same year, Louis Turra, a reputed Philadelphia drug lord and leader of the South Philly Italian-American drug gang, known as the 10th and West Crew, situated in South Philadelphia, was severely beaten by Merlino's soldiers for failing to pay a mafia street tax on his illegal earnings. Angered by the beating, Turra sought vengeance. His father Anthony Turra allegedly hosted a meeting at his house during which Anthony, Louis and his gang discussed killing Merlino. In January 1998, Louis Turra apparently hung himself in a New York City jail while awaiting trial. In March 1998, Anthony Turra, on trial on charges of plotting to kill Merlino, was shot to death outside his home by a gunman in a black ski mask. He was shot twice, once in the eye, as he left for the federal courthouse, where a jury was deliberating in the racketeering and drug case against him and 4 other men. "We consider this an organized crime assassination," a mob hit police inspector Gerald Kane said. However, the entire administration was imprisoned soon after, with Merlino passing leadership to acting boss Joseph Legambi, who is Borgesi's uncle. In June 1999, Merlino was indicted on charges of conspiring with members of the Patriarca crime family to purchase and distribute cocaine. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison on December 3, 2001, on racketeering charges, including extortion and illegal gambling. He was acquitted of murder charges, attempted murder, and drug dealing. Ain't bad, Merlino said. Better than the death penalty. In March 2004, a federal jury acquitted him of August 2001 charges that he and Vincent Centurino, a member of the Philadelphia Mafia's North Jersey faction, had taken part in the 1996 murder of Joseph Sedano, a North Jersey captain. After Merlino's conviction, Joseph Legambi took over as boss, although the FBI thinks Legambi is merely an acting boss for Joey Merlino. In June 2002, Nicky Scarfo Jr. went to jail again. He had been arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 33 months in federal prison for helping to run a multi-million-dollar illegal gambling and loan sharking operation. His wife, Michelle, was expecting their first child, and he was permitted to remain free on bail until the child's christening. He also received 3 years probation. Nicky Scarfo Jr. was released from prison on April 6, 2005. The media reported that he moved to the Jersey Shore after his release and began an effort to take over the Philadelphia crime family again. In March 2008, he purchased a $715,000 home in Township, New Jersey. Shortly afterward, federal investigators began tapping his phones and put him under surveillance as part of an inquiry into an illegal gambling, extortion, fraud, and labor racketeering operation run by Scarfo's best friend and close mob ally, Andrew Marola. In December 2007, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that Scarfo had been demoted within the Lucchese crime family, in part because of ongoing media coverage of his activities and in part because he intended to start a mob war to regain control of the Philly mob. Scarfo also allegedly was involved in the financial takeover of First Plus Financial Group and the embezzlement of millions of dollars from the company. The company drew federal attention in 2006 when it suddenly became very active again. On May 8, 2008, the Federal Bureau of Investigation conducted a series of raids on the company, its subsidiaries, several other companies, a number of First Plus's corporate officers, and several private citizens. Scarfo was indicted on May 14, 2010, on gambling and racketeering charges for his alleged role in what law enforcement authorities claim was a $2 billion international sports betting operation. He was one of 34 New York-based Lucchese crime family members or associates named in the indictment that was announced by the New Jersey Attorney General's office. Scarfo Jr. was identified in open court as a captain of the Lucchese crime family, and his bail was set at $350,000. Authorities alleged that he supervised all Lucchese crime family operations in New Jersey. In October 2011, Michael Mafucci, one of his co-defendants, agreed to plead guilty in the scheme and testify against Scarfo. On October 31, 2011, he was arrested by the FBI for what the agency said was his role in the attempt to take over and embezzle millions of dollars out of the First Plus Financial Group. Scarfo's wife, Lisa Marie Scarfo, was also indicted in the scheme, along with alleged Lucchese mob associate Sal Palolo and several officials of First Plus. Scarfo's father and Vittorio Amuso were named as unindicted co-conspirators. In September 2012, the Miami Herald reported that Merlino currently lives in Florida. In an article released in April 2013 by George Anastasia, Merlino denied any current involvement in the Philly mob and stated that his life as a criminal is over. He was quoted in the interview stating, "Too many rats in the life, and I want no part of that." In October 2014, he was sentenced to 4 months in prison for violating the terms of his release. He was spotted by a surveillance team on June 18, 2014 at an Italian restaurant and later at Havana Nights Bar in the company of 3 convicted felons, including John Ciancaglini, better known as Johnny Chang, a Philadelphia crime family captain and a co-defendant in the 2001 trial. On April 25, 2015, Merlino was released from prison. However, on August 4, 2016, he was arrested with over 40 alleged mafia members and associates from the Lucchese, Gambino, Genovese, and Bonanno crime families on multiple charges including racketeering, health insurance fraud, gambling, and other connected crimes to what is being dubbed as the East Coast Enterprise. Merlino was released Friday, August 12, 2016, on a $5 million bail while he awaits trial. He was ordered to be on house arrest and wear an ankle bracelet, allowing him to only be at his Florida home and restaurant Merlino's from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Salvador Sabella was the Sicilian mafia boss of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania during the 1920s. Sabella was the founder of the Philadelphia crime family. He also groomed its leaders. Born in Sicily in 1891, Sabella became a butcher's apprentice as a young boy. In 1905, tired of dealing with the butcher's violent outbursts, 14-year-old Sabella murdered him. In 1908, Sabella was convicted of the butcher's murder and sent to prison in Milan, Italy for 3 years. At some point, either in prison or after his release, he became involved with the Sicilian mafia. After his release, Sabella left Italy for the United States, apparently as an illegal immigrant. In 1912, he arrived in Brooklyn, New York, and joined the Gambino crime family, which was run by Salvador Tequila, which consisted of many other Castellamarese immigrants. During the next few years, Gambino crime family consigliere Giuseppe Triana trained Sabella for a future role in the organization. In 1919, he was sent to Philadelphia to build a Castellamarese Sicilian criminal organization. As a front, Sabella started an olive oil and cheese business and a soft drink cafe. But his real occupation was to build the family and protect its operations from other criminals. He would train future mob bosses John Aina and Angelo Bruno to run the family. In 1925, Sabella was a suspect in the murder of rival mobster Leo Lanzetti. On May 30, 1927, two rebellious members of the Philadelphia organization, Vincent Cacazza and Joseph Zangi, were shot and killed on a Philadelphia street corner. Zangi's brother Anthony provided police with sufficient evidence to indict Sabella for their murders. Sabella was acquitted, but the authorities discovered that he was an illegal alien. Towards the end of 1927, Sabella was deported to Sicily, and John Aina became acting boss. After Sabella's deportation, the Castellamarese War erupted in New York between the Castellamarese faction, led by traditional mob boss Salvatore Maranzano, and a primarily Neapolitan faction led by Giuseppe Masseria. The two sides would trade gangland slings for several years. As a Castellamarese immigrant, Sabella was allied with Maranzano. In 1929, having returned to the United States, Sabella temporarily relocated to New York with 9 gunmen to fight for Maranzano. On April 15, 1931, the war ended with the murder of Masseria. At this time, Sabella returned to Philadelphia and resumed control of his family. In 1931, he was arrested for assault and battery with a motor vehicle. That same year, at age 40, Sabella retired from organized crime and permanently passed control of the family to John Aina. The reason for Sabella's retirement is unclear. The recent carnage of the Castellamarese War may have prompted him to get out for his own safety. It was said he was forced to step down, but this has been debunked by former Philadelphia wise guys. Sabella reportedly moved to Norristown, Pennsylvania, where he worked as a butcher for many years. In 1962, Salvador Sabella died of natural causes, and the throne passed for the first time within the Philadelphia mob. John Aina took over the Philadelphia crime family after the first boss. Salvador Sabella stepped down at the end of the Castellamarese War in 1931. The Philly mob sided with Salvatore Maranzano faction in the underworld conflict. Aina was an odd choice as mafia boss because he was born in the Messina region of Sicily, usually not associated with the mafia tradition. During his time as boss, the Philadelphia crime family formed an alliance with Jewish organized criminals, called the 69th Street Mob. A civil war erupted in the family during the mid-1930s. The Lanzetti brothers are believed to have been responsible for the shooting death of 43-year-old Aina at the corner of Washington and Passyunk Avenues in the summer of 1936. A gunman firing from the rear window of a passing automobile shot to death both Aina and his lottery racket partner, Martin Feldstein. Police noted that 3 other attempts had been made on Aina's life in the past 10 years. There was considerable media attention to the September 18, 1937, arrest of Michael Montanaro on Philadelphia's North Broad Street. Montanaro was suspected of involvement in the murder of Aina and was shot and wounded by Detective Richard Pete McClure during the arrest. Joseph Bruno next took over the family and was a key man in the Philadelphia organization of Salvador Sabella. Sabella stepped down as boss at the conclusion of the Castellamarese War in 1931. Bruno's role in the Philly mob is unclear between 1931 and 1936. Some sources believe he competed with John Aina for dominance in the regional mafia. Bruno ran a tight and silent crew and kept money flowing, which made Aina put their personal differences aside and focus on money. When Aina was killed in 1936, the result of a feud with the Lanzetti brothers that began during Salvador Sabella's reign, Bruno became the undisputed authority in the Philly mob. Bruno lived outside Philadelphia, first in Bristol, Pennsylvania, and later in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Bruno ruled the Philadelphia underworld for a decade until his death of natural causes. Joseph Ida. In 1919, Giuseppe Joseph Ida came to America and settled in South Philadelphia. Ida met Salvador Sabella, the first boss of the Philadelphia crime family, John Aina and Giuseppe Dovi. Together the three created the Philly Mob. In 1927, Ida, Sabella, and three others were indicted for the murder of two rival gangsters, however, they were never convicted. In 1946, Ida became the boss of the Philly Mob. As boss, Ida created a stronger family to remove the Jewish mafia from his territory, putting an end to the Jewish syndicate in Philadelphia and South Jersey. In October 1957, Ida and his underboss Dominic Oliveto were present at the Appalachian meeting. Ida and Oliveto were arrested at the scene. Finally, he was indicted on drug trafficking charges and was deported to Italy in 1959. Antonio Pollina. Pollina was born in Caccamo, Sicily, and became a naturalized American citizen on July 12, 1944. His rap sheet dated back to 1927 and included arrests for murder, concealed weapons, untaxed liquor, assault and battery. His legitimate employment was as a cheese salesman for Maggio Cheese Company. Pollina was one of the top leaders of the mafia group known as the Greaser Gang or Philadelphia crime family and controlled a large loan shark operation. The ascension of Mr. Miggs to the head of the Philadelphia crime family took place in 1959. Pollina had been a favorite of former bosses Salvador Sabella, John Aina, Joseph Bruno and Joseph Ida. Pollina was handed the reins of the family when Joseph Ida fled the United States to avoid an indictment on narcotic charges. Pollina apparently never felt secure in his position at the head of the table and began plotting to murder those he felt threatened his autonomy. Angelo Bruno fell into this category. Pollina ordered Ignazio Denaro, his underboss, to murder Angelo Bruno, but Denaro instead informed Bruno of Pollina's intentions. Bruno used his connections to the commission to take Pollina's power away from him. The commission authorized Bruno to murder Pollina for reasons that have never been fully explained. The typical theory is that since Pollina plotted to kill Bruno, then he had the right to defend himself against Pollina's plot. In truth, Pollina was the boss, and if he so chose to eliminate one of his family members, the commission had no right to stop him. Whatever the case, Pollina stepped down and Angelo Bruno replaced him and kept Denaro as his underboss. In spite of the alleged murder plot, Pollina remained in Philadelphia and reportedly felt secure enough to ask Angelo Bruno to name him as his consigliere after the death of Joe Rugnetta in 1977. Bruno is said to have declined his request and placed the man who would arrange his death 3 years later instead, Antonio Caponigro. Mr. Miggs died of natural causes in 1993 at the age of 101. Angelo Bruno. Angelo the Gentle Don Bruno was a Sicilian-American mobster who was boss of the Philadelphia crime family for 2 decades. Bruno gained his nickname and reputation due to his preference for conciliation over violence. For over 20 years, Bruno ruled Philadelphia and Atlantic City with an iron fist, controlling most businesses, industries, companies, labor unions, cops, judges, politicians, and local government of both cities. Born in Villalba, Sicily, Bruno emigrated to the United States in his teens and settled in Philadelphia. The son of a grocer, Bruno was a close associate of New York Gambino crime family boss Carlo Gambino. Bruno was a cousin of mobster John Simone. Bruno dropped the name Annaloro and replaced it with his paternal grandmother's maiden name, Bruno. Bruno was married to Sue Moranca and had 2 children. Bruno owned an extermination company in Trenton, New Jersey, an aluminum products company in Hialeah, Florida, and a share in the Plaza Hotel in Havana, Cuba. His first arrest was in 1928 for reckless driving. Subsequent arrests included firearms violations, operating an illicit alcohol still, illegal gambling, amongst other charges. He earned his nickname the Gentle Don after refusing to kill a rival mobster by the name of Antonio Pollina, Mr. Miggs, during the 1950s. Both were front-runners to become the new official boss of the Philadelphia mob. After the deportation of Joe Ida, Bruno gained the approval and backing of the New York Mafia Commission to become the new boss, with the help of his old friend and ally Carlo Gambino. In 1959, Bruno succeeded Joseph Ida as boss of the Philadelphia family. Over the next 20 years, Bruno successfully avoided the intense media and law enforcement scrutiny and outbursts of violence that plagued other crime families. Bruno himself avoided lengthy prison terms despite several arrests. His longest term was 2 years for refusing to testify to a grand jury. Bruno did not allow family involvement in narcotics trafficking, preferring more traditional family operations such as extortion, illegal gambling, labor racketeering, prostitution, pornography, bookmaking and loan sharking. However, Bruno did allow other gangs and criminals to distribute narcotics in Philadelphia and Atlantic City for a large share of the profits. This arrangement angered some family members who wanted a share of the drug-dealing profits. He preferred to operate through bribery and peacemaking rather than violence and murder, though he did order a lot of murder and violence only if need be. For instance, he banished an extremely violent soldier, Nicky Scarfo, to the then backwater of Atlantic City for being too violent and bloodthirsty. Later in his tenure, Bruno had to deal with the five families' desire to operate in the increasingly and incredibly lucrative Atlantic City gambling industry. The five families thought Atlantic City was far too lucrative for the Philadelphia crime family to get all of the action, even though Atlantic City had long been regarded as the Philadelphia's mafia's turf. While under mafia rules, they couldn't set up shop or a power base in Atlantic City without Bruno's consent. Bruno knew better than to try to challenge the omnipotent five families. Each family was far more powerful, influential and dangerous than the Philadelphia crime family, and each family of the five families were so much larger than his crime family, and Bruno knew that any attempt to challenge the mighty and invincible five families could lead to his death and the eradication of his whole empire. Instead, he allowed them to operate in Atlantic City in exchange for a sizable cut of their profits. Several factions within the Philadelphia family began conspiring to betray the aging Bruno. On March 21, 1980, the 69-year-old Bruno was killed by a shotgun blast in the back of the head as he sat in his Cadillac Seville. With him at the time of his murder was future boss of the Philly mob John Stanfa, who at the time was Bruno's driver. It is believed that the killing was ordered by Antonio Caponigro, aka Tony Bananas, Bruno's consigliere. A few weeks later, Caponigro's body was found stuffed in a body bag in the trunk of a car in New York City. About $300 in bills were jammed in his mouth and an us, to be interpreted as signs of greed. The commission had reportedly ordered Caponigro's murder because he assassinated Bruno without their sanction. Other Philadelphia family members involved in Bruno's murder were tortured and killed. After Caponigro's murder, Philip Testa led the family for 1 year until he was killed by a nail bomb at his home. Testa's death resulted from an attempt by Peter Casella, Testa's underboss, and Frank Chicky Narducci to become the Philadelphia boss and underboss. After Testa's death, Nicky Scarfo took over the Philadelphia family. In the ensuing years, the Philadelphia family would be decimated by government informants, more infighting, and the prosecutions of Scarfo and other mobsters. If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.